Hello, mates. It's Rife Nation. We're talking air quality today. It's been a game changer in my own family with my daughter and the allergies she's got living here in Johannesburg, very sensitive to a lot of allergens. And so I needed to look into air quality because water, we've got a five process, distillation from remineralization to restructuring to using analemma water. We'll link to those podcasts. So we need to talk air quality because biohacking includes not only the internal environment, which is our bodies, but also the external environment, which is crucially important for health and wellness. So, I've had the pleasure of introducing David Millburn from Hypoair. He's the CTO, and he sent me a unit, and I've been blown away because my daughter, I've seen a total change. So welcome to the show, David Millburn.
Good to be here. Glad to talk about air quality.
Brilliant. And I think it's really important. So maybe just give us the rundown of possibly two stories, David, of people that took on one of your units. We're going to go through the different units, Germ Defender, Air Angel, the whole home unit, and talk about the difference in your technology, which is pretty profound. But give us possibly two stories of people that have sent you testimonials to say, David, Hypoair, you've changed my life. This is what it's done because air quality has changed in my home.
Sure. Well, that's a big question. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to have to rack my brain. We've been doing this for about 15 years, and I talk to clients basically every week. And one of the things I often say is that air quality is a piece of the puzzle, and so especially if you're a biohacker, it may be a larger piece or it may be a smaller piece. So in some cases, our clients don't notice any difference. They were resilient before. They're mitigating future problems. They don't see any difference after. But you're alleviating the risk of that. And then the other half of our clients, those tend to have more extreme environmental issues or internal issues where they're extra sensitive. And then that's where you can see bigger changes in your life. With or without biometrics, it's dramatic. As a company, Hypoair, we focus on the environment. So we can reduce your exposure. How that impacts your body is something that we can't make any claims for obvious reasons. You may have bad sleep because you're reading too much news, or you may have bad sleep because you have mold toxicity issues in your house, or particulate issues, or allergens. And I think a lot of us have experienced that, whether at home or traveling, where you can see a direct link to how you feel in your air quality. And that's obviously backed by tons of science and research. But in our case, we do hear those stories, but we just have to be careful not to say this is what your experience will be.
Sure.
If you remove air quality issues from your air. But I mean, we hear those stories like you're saying, where the kid never slept before and now they sleep. I used to cough before and now I don't cough. I used to see mold growing on the wall, now I don't see it anymore. We of course have a lot of quantitative studies that can show the concentration differences and then how that affects your sleep or the visual environment of used to see when the sunlight came in through the window, used to see kind of like a cloud of little particulates, and now you can't see them anymore. We always love those stories. Yeah. A lot of what we deal with at Hypoair are things you cannot physically see, smell, taste, and interact with. But over time, with heavier concentration, your body gets overwhelmed and you can't naturally detoxify. Okay. And so sometimes those issues can be much more extreme. But I would have to think about more and more specific issues. We have many testimonials on our site. And if there's a specific scenario, we can definitely talk about that too. But yeah, I think that's how I would phrase the conversation because, we want to make sure we come into it with the right expectations. We want to apply the best, science and technology to the specific needs of your home and your environment so that we can, optimize for that situation.
Brilliant. A very technical answer. There's a lot of technical info and research on the Hypoair,
sure.
And I think it's measured, and that's what we like here, not over-promising and under-delivering. So I really appreciate that. But as we talk now, maybe one or two people that, yes, they were coughing, then they weren't coughing.
I'll give you a couple. So for years, my role was actually more on the commercial side. So the last couple of years, I've worked more and more with homeowners, but for years, it was more on the commercial side. So one of my favorite stories is actually from, 8 years ago or something. It was a veterinary, dog kennel. They were treating dogs there. And they got our technology in, they installed it specifically for odor, which is not something we always focus on as a company, but this was an odor situation. And they installed it for a few days and they said, it's not working. And we said, okay, that's fine, no problem. Uninstall it. We have all these return policies, everything. Once they turned the units off, then the odor came back and their noses were no longer used to it. And they said, wow, it is disgusting here. But us and all of our staff, we were used to it. So we didn't notice the reduction because our noses were used to it to begin with. And then it's hard to track that. But then as soon as they turned it off, then they said, we apologize. We didn't understand what it smelled like to begin with. And then they installed it back and kept using it. So I mean, I would say that's like a fun example that comes to mind where, kind of the expectation was that, they didn't even realize what their environment smelled like before. And so it took them actually turning it off. And actually a similar story that comes to mind is we had a family say that they came home from a 2-week vacation and immediately they got home and their heart dropped. They thought their dogs ran away. Really? They couldn't smell the dogs. And they didn't even like register in their mind, but they just thought the dogs are gone, they're missing. Because they'd left the home and come back, and it was such a different odor that their mind just went straight to their dogs had escaped. So, but of course we hear lots of stories where, people aren't sneezing anymore, asleep, all those things as well. So
brilliant. And they can find that on your website. Is that correct, David?
Yep. Definitely. Yep. And we've, on the commercial side, we have lots of case studies as it relates to specific contaminants. Some of those obviously are on the more confidential side. We can share stories without names in some cases, when it comes to things like hospitals or, grocery stores, you're dealing with, bacteria, infections, things along those lines. But we have lots and lots of stories. We've been doing this for a long time. So.
Okay. Look, we obviously speak more into the residential space. People listening here are either medical practitioners or biohackers or health enthusiasts. So obviously we want those residential home stories, just like what happened with my daughter. So obviously it's, let's talk about air quality. Why is it so important with regards to health and disease?
That's a good question. I mean, air quality is one of the main ways that we are exposed to the things that cause those challenges, obviously. So if you think about, purifying water, I mean, that's a very tangible thing. You don't want toxins in your water, but you breathe the equivalent of a swimming pool every day. And it's not just, your lungs, but it's even your skin. And so we have some partners that they actually focus on the inflammation of skin and air quality. But, when it comes to just breathing, obviously that is a major vector for your exposure to toxins, whether it's something like mold or chemicals or particulates, allergens. All of our bodies interact in different ways, but air is going to be a primary way that you're exposed. And the buildings that we live in are optimized for energy efficiency, but often not for air quality. So in our experience in the US, and I know less about South Africa, but we seal up our homes very tightly for energy efficiency, but then you trap everything inside. So then air quality becomes incredibly unnatural. So even if you look at a city which has unnatural air, the outdoor air in a city is going to be, in most cases, significantly better than the indoor air. So you think about, pollution and everything outside, but the indoor air is actually worse. And that's statistically true across the world. And so if we have no mitigation inside, then you're just trapping those things inside. So, I'm a big believer in the resilience of the body and just natural detoxifying and everything. But if you're constantly exposed to high concentrations, that's when the body gets overwhelmed and you start to, in many cases, experience those problems. One of the frustrating things I would say, first off, is we have a lot of cases where one person in the home out of 5 is severely reactive and the other 4 are fine. So it's sometimes an individual experience too, but how our bodies are going to react with that. But air quality, I mean, there's obvious examples the last few years of what everyone's been talking about with, viruses, something like that can obviously be airborne, but, for years we've worked with bacteria, mold, chemicals, particulates, and the smaller the particulate is, the more penetrating it is. So a lot of times it's not the dust, it's not the hair that you see in the air, it's the ultrafine particles that are actually causing us trouble.
Oh, that's profound. And at the end of the day, our bodies need a detox. And if we're getting so many of these different allergens and toxins into our system, whether it's water or air, it acts as a domino effect and starts building up and still building up, and then eventually causes disease. So we do need to eliminate it from all different areas. And some people do have a better ability to detox, which is crucially important, but others over years, it might not take 3 weeks for you to get sick. It might take 3 years, or it might take 13 years, but it builds up.
Absolutely.
And one of the biggest, areas we believe in is detoxification. That's causing, probably a lot of disease if people cannot get rid of these toxins. And that's why we speak about infrared sauna. We talk about sunlight,
Absolutely.
sweating, and then making sure that your phase 1 and phase 2 liver detoxification is good. So I think it's important, and I think it's going to be a game changer, like you said, for some people more than others. So and I know there's a lot of research on your site. Let's talk about, air sort of purification. Yeah, go for it. Jump in there.
I just want to mention one more thing. We are not advocating that you live in a perfect bubble of sterilization either. We want to introduce natural sanitization, so you're reducing those concentrations, and then you can go out into the world and be exposed but not reactive. So one personal story I would share is that my oldest son has had outdoor allergen issues. And when he was younger, he had a lot of respiratory trouble when he was laying down for his nap times.
Yeah.
And so we're not stopping him from going outside and playing in the leaves. We want him to do that. What we wanted to do is make the place where he's laying down as safe as possible so his body could detoxify. And then over the last, 2 years, I don't think he's had hardly any symptoms. And now, again, I'm not saying that, you can necessarily see that, but if you can create a safe place for the body to recover, especially sleep, then our hope is that you can go out and live in the real world and be exposed, but not to the concentrations indoors that are going to be, basically preventing your body from getting that good rest. And if you're going to start anywhere, start in the bedroom. So it can be a little overwhelming for people as they come to this conversation where they're like, okay, I drive in a car to work. I work in an office building that I can't control. I live here and I go there and all these places. Start in the bedroom and create a safe place there, and then you can work from there. So
brilliant. I think that's very, very good advice. We talk about that when we speak about electromagnetic radiation, making sure that when you sleep, it's the cleanest environment, most safe environment you can from electromagnetic radiation. So it's the same with air quality. It's the same with the water. The most of the water you drink, got to make sure that when you're going through your regenerative process, which is at night, you're going to detox your lymphatic system, which is your brain wash, cleaning out the brain, all the toxins, that is working really well at night, and that your body's not fighting, these toxins that you're inhaling the whole time while you're sleeping. I think that's fundamentally important. So we do want sleep to be the greatest sort of regenerative process and restorative process. And I think that's why the bedroom is fundamentally important. Before we get into the different products and looking at what they do with regards to the different toxins from mold and from bacteria and viruses, let's talk about assessment. How can people assess their air quality? Because they want to be able to, if people don't buy the products, you want to give them some take homes that they can do to try and help their air quality. Of course, if they've got issues, we want to make sure that we can supply a product or number of products that we have ratified, that we have gone through, that I've used personally. We're very authentic here at Made to Thrive. We only promote what we've used, what we believe in, based on research, based on science, and based on empirical evidence. You've been doing this for 15 years, but give us the ins and outs of how people can assess their air quality.
Absolutely. That's an excellent question. And one thing I would just say for this whole conversation is it can get rather complicated. Feel free to reach out to us. We will have an individual email, phone call with you to walk you through specific questions and look at your unique situation, because it can be overwhelming. But as far as free resources, our site has close to 200 free articles. Many of them walk you through specific indoor assessments, moisture inventories, what's geographically going around, your home, how close is it to cities, what type of outdoor events are taking place, whether it's allergens or pollen or wildfires or train derailments. I mean, whatever it is that you're going on, we probably have articles specifically on that situation. And then also looking at the structure of your home. Because if you could spend $10,000 on HEPA and underneath your bed, the carpet is moldy, and you're going to be kind of losing that battle. Yeah. So you got to kind of take it as a holistic approach. It can start very simple and very inexpensive. So in some places that deal with humidity, our favorite recommendation is a $5 humidity monitor, where you can look for pockets of humidity, because you could have a bathroom that has a vent that doesn't work. Maybe it pushes it up and into a wall. We see that. It's just purely a structural error when they built the home. Your home may have a negative pressure, so it's pulling in particulates from outside. Maybe you have a basement and that has a pressure issue, and so you're either pulling air from the basement up, or you're pulling air down and dealing with mold, and you could have an HVAC system that's wrong. So there's a lot of question marks when you first start this process, and it's a lot is in your hands to educate yourself, but then you can also reach out to us and we can walk you through some of those specific questions. But it's something like a Breezometer, totally free resource online, gives you very specific air quality where you are, based off of a lot of overlapping data, not just a single weather station in your city. Because in your city, they may have a weather station on a hill and the air quality is one thing there, but at your neighborhood, it's different. Yeah. And at your neighborhood during rush hour, it's different. And one of the things I say is, if you're, say, a school is often in a central location. So schools have much higher asthma rates because they're near the cities. And if you're going to have recess during rush hour, the air quality at that school may be 50 times worse than it is an hour before. Same thing with you. If you're going to go outside to exercise, maybe try not to exercise on a street during rush hour, because the exposure is maybe 50 times worse than an hour before. So the air quality is changing a lot. It's not just a static number. And so when you open windows, when you close windows, there's lots and lots of questions, but it just comes back to kind of educating yourself. And with my own personal journey, I mean, I used to work internationally a lot in Africa as well. And I remember one summer specifically, I was just reminded of this, a month ago or so. Every time I went into the room I was staying for work that summer, I would sneeze so much I would start to bleed. And at the time, I was an educated, young businessman, trying to do my thing. I did not connect that experience with air quality at all. I just didn't have a paradigm for it. So as you start to kind of step into this, you can start to connect the dots and some of those things, and then take steps to protect yourself and to get relief. And some of that is structural. Some of it's very simple things like what cleaning chemicals are you using? Are you adding synthetic chemicals to your environment and trapping them in? Could you just simply open a window when you're cooking and exhaust some of that bad air? So there's lots of simple steps that don't cost money, and it's just process of educating.
So you say hygrometer to measure humidity. That's the first thing. That would be good to keep it around about 40%, 45%, they say.
If you're in an area where humidity is a problem, or you can have leaks, or like in the case of a bathroom, you're adding humidity to the air, and then if it's not being distributed, then it can stay on a surface, and then that's where something like mold can grow. But if you're in a dry environment, you might actually want to add humidity to the air, because you could have completely clean air, but air that's so dry that you're experiencing some of the same symptoms. Well, then now you want to introduce humidity, but you want to do it in a way that doesn't create like puddles, essentially like damp surfaces. You want enough ventilation, airflow. So you're drying out surfaces, distributing the air. And one of the things I do mention is that my mentality when I first started thinking about air quality was, if you ever have kids and you put colored drops in water and it makes everything one color, that's how I thought of it as. You put one drop in the air and then it kind of just disperses evenly out. And that's not, from our experience, the case. It's more like clouds. You could have a bedroom with bad air, and then down the hallway, it's significantly different. There's going to be some mixing for sure, but it's a bit more like clouds. And so you could have a really humid bathroom and it's going to leak, but you can have pockets of bad air as well. Okay. So, it's not just, your kitchen's bad and so your whole house is bad. You could have different challenges in different parts of your home.
Brilliant. So hygrometer, humidity, that's important. Here in Johannesburg, it's like, 2,000 meters above sea level, 1,500. It gets very dry here in the winter, so that we use humidifiers to bring the humidity to 40, 45. Then if it's very rainy, we stop it and aerate the room. So a big part of the thing is getting airflow. What I understand, you really want to get as much outside air in. That's the first thing. Assess it with a hygrometer. And then you said there's a website. Does that apply to South Africans and Africans, this website?
Yeah, Breezometer we have no association with the company, but from over the years, I've just found it to be a reliable resource. It's free. Their angle is they want to sell their data to companies. And so for every user, it's free, but they want their API to integrate. So for you, it's free. For me, it's free. And what they do is, instead of using a single point of data like a weather station, and that's how most of those websites are, Breezometer layers on satellite data, traffic data, topography, things like that. And then it gives you a guesstimate, but in my mind, it's actually more accurate than a single point of data in your city. So, some of these websites, you'll look at San Francisco and they've got a weather station on a city, like just one point of the city. But if you're in the suburbs, that data point is not as relevant to you as what's going on in your neighborhood. And so certainly being aware of what's going on around you. Air quality testing and measurement is very limited in its accuracy. So we just have to kind of understand, like, these are kind of benchmarks. It doesn't show you the whole picture, but these are just kind of different data points that you can use to educate yourself and give you an idea of what's going on. Because your neighbor could be burning who knows what, and then you're being directly exposed to that. And that's not going to show up on basically any of these. And there's no really meter out there. You could spend $5,000 on a meter and it's not going to tell you accurately what's going on.
Wow.
We have used multi-$1,000 meters inside of a casino on a Friday night during their busiest time, and it's found 0 VOCs, so 0 chemicals in the air, because it's not looking for the right chemicals. And so there's no meter, to our knowledge, on Earth that can really give you an accurate representation, even if you spent $100,000. It just doesn't exist yet as far as technology. So if you really want to measure something like mold in your air, you're going to have to use some sort of service. And we Got Mold. I don't think that's in South Africa, but it's going to be a device that sucks up air in a set amount of volume. So you know how much air is in there. You seal it in a container and you have to send it to a lab. And sometimes they have to deep freeze it. But you're going to be spending, $500 a sample. Most cases, that's not necessary. We don't recommend it. You just want to be looking at some of these data points. You can look at particulates. You can look at CO2. You can look at some of these indicators of air quality, but you just have to realize that's what it is. It's not the whole picture. It's an indicator. And then you have to be wise with what's going on outside your window. Maybe now is not a good time to open your window. Maybe it is. So maybe during rush hour, it's not a good time. Maybe if there's a forest fire outside, if your neighbor's, cooking or grilling or something right outside, maybe now is not the time to open the window. But otherwise, the outdoor air is significantly cleaner than the indoor air. And we have some innovations. I think I shared that with you, that we are bringing out, because we're more than just an air purifier device company. We're an R&D company. So we have a lot of associated products and patents that we're working on, including, nanofiber screens, to do things like filter your air as it's coming in the window. And so we do have a lot of innovation coming in that area, but a lot of it's just educating yourself and then taking steps to,
but let's go through it sort of like systematically, because I know I'm going to get a lot of questions here. One, basically you need good airflow. Generally, you got to use common sense when you're going to open the windows, but you don't want air to stagnate. We don't have central systems in South Africa generally, unless you're very, very wealthy to have central air cons and that. But we don't heat we don't heat the rooms up at all generally. So keep the airflow as best as you can. Be aware of the outside air. Number 2, watch the humidity. Make sure that you've got the humidity 40-45%, especially down at the coast where it can be way too humid. The third thing you said are VOCs and particulates and CO2. So you wouldn't be able to measure those, would you? You'd have to somehow be aware of them, or just correct me here.
On the particulates, you can measure them with some accuracy. Whether or not you want to invest in like $100, $200 meter, that's up to you. A lot of those particulate meters are pretty good. They're going to be measuring specific diameter of particles. So like PM10 would be 10 microns in diameter. A human hair is around 50 to 100 microns in diameter. The visible range for an eye is around 40, if I'm remembering right. So PM10 is 10 microns. PM2.5 is 2.5 microns. And then it goes much smaller from there. So a lot of things we're concerned with are less than a micron, but still those particulate meters are going to give you an idea of what's going on in your air. As far as the VOCs, we have technology that can remove them from the air. And you can also use things like
what is a VOC?
Carbon. So volatile organic compound. Probably some of the most famous VOCs would be new car smell. Some people love it, but that's off-gassing chemicals. Or paint. You paint a room. It's you smell an odor, so it's off-gassing chemicals. And those chemicals from building construction, some of them can off gas for say 2 years. So it's putting out a certain amount of gas over time. It's not going to be consistent, but if you lay a new floor, sometimes that floor, the adhesive in the floor, can off gas for 2 years. And so then if you seal up your home real tight, then you're trapping those chemicals in the air. You may or may not be able to smell them, but they're in your air. And then there's typically no counter mitigation. So they will dissolve. You open your window, you can exhaust them. Cooking chemicals, for instance, you can exhaust those. But a lot of the chemicals in your air are going to be trapped. So the first thing we like to recommend is just look at the products you're introducing into the environment. So if you're using synthetic fragrances, you're spraying things in your air to cover up odors by adding on chemicals on top of it, that's probably not a good idea. I think we can safely recommend that. And probably a story I would share with that is we've worked with some of the most famous hotels in the world, and some of them have smoking casinos. And historically, instead of removing the smoke from the air, they've added coconut. And so they add synthetic coconut over smoke, and they just end up with smoky coconut. And they think they're better off, but you've really just introduced more chemicals to the air. It's not like it's natural coconut odor. It's a chemical. And so if you can reduce the source of VOCs in your environment, that'd be the first step. And so we do have a cleaning product on our site that's zero VOC, but there's other ways that you can clean your environment by reducing the source of VOCs. So don't use fragrances for the most part. A lot of our clients tend to be hypersensitive, so anything that's a fresh rain smell or springtime clean smell, those kind of things it's just chemicals. And so you want to reduce those sources if possible. Use low or no VOC paints, sprays, products, so you can reduce the source. That'd be like an easy first step. And then with something like a VOC, you either have to break it down, so using something like our APCO technology, or you have to absorb it like a sponge, and then you have to basically throw it away. So you have to pull it out of the air into a sponge type material like activated carbon, and then you have to get rid of that filter, or use something like our APCO that actually breaks it down into its base components. So, and then again, we want to replicate what happens outside. So the VOCs, the chemicals outside, go up in the atmosphere breaks them down. And so we want to replicate those processes.
Okay, I like that. So you basically want to try and mimic nature and what nature does. So that's
our idea.
Let's jump into the Air Angel. That's something that I've used in the bedroom of my daughter, and it's worked exceptionally well. Talk about the technologies and what it does for mold, bacteria, viruses, this APCO and UVGI, and what polar ionization is.
Sure. And I will actually step back from the Air Angel and do a smaller unit first. I think it might be a little more understandable. Okay. But one of the things I would say with a home, before you even look at specific products, is you have to look at all the spaces where people are and realize that they're pretty much separate spaces. So if you have a 2-bedroom home, you have the bedrooms, which often have the doors closed. You have bathrooms, and you have common areas.
Yeah.
The air is going to mix, and sometimes you can use a single device and move it around. But years ago, we used to have products that covered 1,000 square feet, 2,000 square feet, larger areas. And what we were realizing is that the idea to cover an entire home from one central location is not realistic unless you have central air. So in the US parts of the world, you have central air systems that have a duct network of tunnels. But otherwise, if you don't have that, you have to look at multiple smaller units to cover each of the spaces. And so that's why we kind of have our products designed for smaller areas. So something like our Germ Defender is 100 square feet. That's a smaller bathroom, smaller bedroom, smaller office. You can have 6 Germ Defenders in a home, spread them out to the different areas. In the case of an Air Angel, you're going to have over 3 times the power for a larger space. Yeah. And so that's kind of why we have these different sizes. You want multiple throughout the home if you don't have a central air system.
Let's just talk about, because we use square meters. Would you be able to, I think 300 square foot is like 27 square meters. So I'm not sure exactly on the conversion. I know you probably will.
I need to brush myself up on that. I've looked at it many times over the years, and I guess I'm a very American.
No problem. It's just that people are going to measure in square meters. I think because the germ defender is possibly, could be for some people. I just thought the Air Angel is more practical just because some of the bedrooms in my house, like our main bedroom's probably 20 squares, and I think 27 is 300. I think 100 squares must be probably about maybe 10
That sounds about right.
10 square meters.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
so these numbers are rough estimates. Obviously,
okay,
what's going on in this space matters more to us than the dimensions of the room.
Yeah.
And you can maximize the effect of any of our products with more airflow. So any other source of airflow, a ceiling fan, another fan, a wall-mounted AC system, any of those can multiply the effect of our technology. So the germ defender, that one let's say it's for 10 square meters.
The idea is it's 9.2. I'm just hearing 100 square foot is 9.2 square meters. Okay.
Yep. So let's say it's for 9 or 10 square meters.
Yeah.
If you put that near another source of airflow, it could do 30 square meters. It could do 50 square meters. So its ability to purify is actually for larger areas, but its limitation is the airflow. So and so then the other part of all this is that technology in that unit is the polar ionization.
What, the germ defender?
The germ defender, that's polar ionization, and so that excels at particulates, allergens, biologicals, so bacteria, molds, yeasts, viruses, and it's a little weaker against chemicals and odors. So the polar ionization. The Air Angel, which is for the 30 square meters, has the same technology plus the APCO. And the APCO is the technology we're talking about that can break down the chemicals very effectively. So it has the same technology, same benefits, plus the APCO, which has redundancies on all biologicals, but then significantly more efficacy against chemicals. So that would be the big difference. The Air Angel is for larger rooms, but also has much more chemical removal power. And so originally we designed that unit for vehicles and travel. And so when you're in a vehicle or you're in a hotel room, a lot of times the contaminant levels, especially chemicals, is much higher than in your home. And you don't have a control over the sources of the chemicals. You have what's around you on the road, or in the case of a hotel room, whatever they clean the room with, whatever the person before you used, that's what you're dealing with. And so the Air Angel was designed for those higher chemical situations. And so it has the two technologies. The only disadvantage of that second technology really is that the APCO requires an annual replacement cell, maybe every 1 to 2 years, and it changes out like a battery. The Germ Defender has no replacement parts, but the APCO technology does require one replacement part. Otherwise, we try to make all of our units as maintenance free as possible, because we live in the real world too, and changing out big bulky filters all the time just doesn't make sense. And
how do you know when to replace that Air Angel part?
So in the case of the Air Angel, there's an internal glow, and once that goes out, it's gone. Okay. If you never replacement, you still have probably 60% of the power of the unit.
Okay.
So yeah, it's pretty obvious.
Right. So Germ Defender polar ionization. Okay, and how does that work?
So how the actual technology works, the polar ionization, most people have maybe heard of ionizers. So ionizers is like a blanket term that is applied to air purification, and it almost always refers to negative ionization. So that's when you're only producing one polarity and you're producing negative oxygen, so negative O2. And the problem with that is that cascades into ozone production. And you and I were talking a little bit about that earlier, but when you create a bunch of static, so a bunch of negative ions, it creates a bubble of static around the unit, so it can't affect large areas. And so it creates this kind of black wall syndrome. So this is a negative ionizer. And then it also creates ozone. The Germ Defender in the polar ionization splits water vapor in the air, just like it does outside, into positive hydrogen and the negative oxygen. So you have both polarities. And because of that, it's non-ozone producing and non-static producing. So it doesn't create a bubble of static. You can actually travel great distances. So we use that same technology in hospitals, in skyscrapers, and aerospace manufacturing, and we put it on the top of the building, and the polar ionization can affect downstream into the ambient air in the rooms, because it's non-ozone producing and non-static producing. And so with something like a virus, like the coronavirus, for instance, that unit, to our knowledge, was the first air purifier in the world tested against the SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus, because it could disable it on a surface outside of the unit. and it is able to do that safely. So we had it tested as a disinfectant at the time. Everyone was, obviously unsure what was happening in the world and was panicking. And so we had it tested as a disinfectant, and it was able to neutralize the coronavirus on a surface outside of the unit. It does the same thing with things like mold, bacteria, yeast. So it's able to naturally interact with surfaces that are exposed to the air. So just suppress it where it's growing, disable it where it is. And then with particulates in the air, so something like mold can put out spores. And then if you kill those spores, you can break them into pieces. But those pieces, the polar ionization is able to give a charge to. So it gives a positive or a negative charge. And so it clusters them together. And then they get bigger and heavier. And so the bigger and heavier they are, the less likely they are to penetrate your lungs, the easier they are to filter and get out of the environment and fall out of the air. So if there's any particulates in the air, we want to get them larger, heavier, and get them out of the air. We don't want them in the first place, so it does that as well, but it also helps reduce the penetration of particles and then gets them out of the air. So that's the polar ionization. And then the APCO technology basically uses originally developed a PCO, so photocatalytic oxidation, was developed by NASA to try to look at trace VOCs on deep space missions. So obviously a challenge, you have the same air, you just have to circulate over and over again. And if you're trying to go to Mars in the future, how do you get rid of those trace VOCs that are just circulating through the system over and over? And if you had to grow plants, how do you get rid of things like ethanol gas? How do you get it out of the air? And so they originally looked at PCO to do that, basically low maintenance, low footprint, low energy, and you can break them down on a molecular level. It's the same thing that happens with sunlight and the minerals in the air. So you have UV light reacting with a catalyst. In our case, this was the technology we first brought out about 15 years ago. And that's where we took the original PCO from NASA. We developed our own proprietary catalyst, used nano-size catalyst as well. And then that technology is what kind of got us going. But that technology produces hydroxyl radicals on the surface of the catalyst that are very effective at ripping apart chemicals, killing biologicals as they pass through the chamber. So those hydroxyl radicals don't leave the chamber. They're just inside of the chamber of the unit.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So the big advantage, because a German Defender for 9 squares, most bedrooms, kids' bedrooms and that, and ours is a bit bigger, but that seem like it'd be quite effective then from a polarization. So unless you're using like a lot of chemicals or you've got a chemical factory close by, that's the benefit of the APCO. So that's where you can get improvements.
Exactly. Right? Yep, exactly. So for a lot of homes, you don't really need as much odor removal. Now, if you have large dogs or something like that, you tend to have more odors. But for just normal people, you don't really have as many of those odors coming in. And then on the chemical side, you can mitigate the sources of those chemicals. But if you're moving into a home and say it had really stinky paint, well, that's a really good indication there's a lot of chemicals in the air. You certainly can't smell all of them, but if you can smell a chemical, then there's a lot of other ones. And so that's where an air angel can provide more efficacy. Now, the germ defender, you can supplement with other technologies. We have optional carbon filters that can fit into there. And there's other ways you can mitigate chemicals in your environment. But the germ defender in general is going to give you most of the air quality needs of a home at basically a third the cost or half the cost. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, just tell me about the light. That was my only concern, because the light emitting, because obviously light can be a pollutant at night, blue light, UV light. We want to keep red, oranges, and yellows at night. Just tell me what you can do with that light. Even the buttons, this is a personal, but even the illuminated buttons on the Air Angel, I was trying to cover. Then I wasn't sure. I said, I was going to speak to you, trying to cover the stuff so the light doesn't show. But then there was this like glow on the ceiling of the Air Angel. Can you cover how do you cover it and prevent the light from causing sort of,
definitely
malillumination at night when it's supposed to be very dark?
So I'm in your boat too. So I'm a zero light guy at night. And in the US, we kind of have to balance some of that with our product design, because in the US, they do tend to like a lot of lights. But we do recommend covering those indicator lights. You can use the little blackout stickers for those. The internal glow, though, is the harder one. You don't have to point it at you. It doesn't even have to be in the same room as you. It doesn't even have to be on at night. But that internal glow is from the germicidal UV bulb reacting with the catalyst. And so you can't completely stop that inside the unit. The Germ Defender is completely zero light, no light of any kind, no indicator lights, nothing. And so that's one of the other advantages too, that I should have mentioned. But with the Air Angel, you can even use it in your kitchen. It doesn't have to be in your bedroom. It doesn't have to be pointing at your face. It doesn't have to be right next to you. It can be on the other side of the space, and then you can use airflow to get the benefits, or move it to the kitchen during the night. Because I'm the same. I don't want no lights of any kind, no glow, anything in the bedroom at night. And so that's one of the challenges with that technology. We have to balance the chemical removal and the odor and the benefits from that with the glow. So you can get rid of all the indicator lights, but the glow is
you can't.
The soft glow. Some people like it, but I mean, to me, it's not ideal.
Okay. So basically, are you saying that if I run the Air Angel in the day, and I run it throughout the day, because we're running it now in my daughter's room, we put it on 1, I think the fan speed 1. I mean, total ionization, I think they're 3. So it's on maximum there, and then we use it in the day. I leave it on sort of setting 1, and then at night I put it on 3, because I thought sleep is the most important. Make sure that it's strong. Are you saying we could run it basically 3 all day while the airflow is there, and then at night switch it off, and you're still going to get the benefit?
Yes. So probably the analogy, I'm trying to think of the best one, but if you have kids, if you had a diaper pail, let's say, something that's really stinky, there's a constant source of new odor. So when you turn that unit off, it's not going to have residual benefits other than you have a cleaner starting point.
Yeah.
So all through the night, there could be new sources of contaminants that are being introduced, but you started the night clean. So I would say you're much better. We prefer 24/7 mitigation because there's always going to be new contaminants. But yes. So if you can get a clean starting point, it's not like you're going to have a dirty room by morning. You're going to be dealing with the most of it ongoing. You're suppressing, removing, dealing with it ongoing. And then the nighttime, you can use something like a Germ Defender, or, have the Air Angel further away from the room.
But it's still got to be in the room where the airflow is, because I mean, if someone's sleeping,
so if you close the door or something, that's separate.
You got a problem. So it sounds like the Germ Defender, from a basically overall mold, bacteria, polar ionization, unless you've got a very strong chemical problem, and unless you've got a very strong you said chemicals and you said odor, unless you've got a huge odor problem or a chemical problem, you're probably better off doing the Germ Defender. Is that right?
Yeah. And then you have larger spaces too. So something like the Air Angel, I would definitely recommend for, say, a kitchen. Because you have a lot of chemicals, a lot of odors produced during that process. But for a bedroom, you've got the size to consider, but then, the other aspects as well.
But I mean, you could put 2 Germ Defenders.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have people do that.
Because I mean, then you're not getting light. You're not getting problems with any of the indicators at all. You don't have to replace anything either. And then I suppose you could keep an Air Angel in the house, and then if you've got odors or you've got chemicals, like you painted a room or there's a smell, you could just bang it in there for the whole day.
Exactly. Yeah. So these are tools to use. These are new tools.
I'm just trying to work it out, David. Because at the end of the day, it's going to be practical. It's going to be user friendly, financially viable. A lot of those things. I'm also trying to see what I'm going to stock for Made to Thrive. Because I mean, your whole home unit, it's very unlikely. Unless I've got someone who's got significant conditions with significant finances, to put that whole unit in, it's going to be costly. So, all right. So what is the UVGI technology that I picked off your website? We've spoken about polarization. The APCO is that the UV LED light? Is that the technology there?
Yeah, it's not using an LED. In that case, it's a type of bulb, but it's using a specific wavelength of UV light that's germicidal. So that's what the UVGI is standing for. It's the germicidal UV light. And then that is the starting of the catalytic reaction. So UV light, sunlight has a lot of benefits when it comes to air quality, but they're limited in their scope. So there's lots of gimmicky products on the market, little UV based ones. UV is very effective in close proximity with direct line of sight and with sufficient contact time. So UV has been used in things like the HVAC for years all over the world. But if you can imagine things flying past it in an airflow, it only has so much time to react. And then every inch, every millimeter that you go further away, it has a significant drop in impact. But UV can kill biologicals in the air. Sunlight can kill in the air. But the way that we use it is we use that sunlight to react with the catalyst. And the catalyst is what creates the hydroxyl radicals. And that's what's very effective against the biologicals and then the chemicals. So the hydroxyl radicals are considered the detergent of Earth's atmosphere. It's like the most reactive species out there that is purifying the air of Earth. And so we create on the catalyst as well.
What do you mean by biologicals?
We kind of lump the mold, bacteria, virus, yeast together. So like the biological hazards in your environment.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the polarionization also destroys that in the germ defender. Is that correct?
Yes, in a different way, but yes. So there's redundancies there. And with air quality, if you have an operating room in a hospital, you want as many redundancies as possible. So redundancies are a good thing, not a bad thing when it comes to air quality. But yeah, so the biological overlap of the two provides more redundancies. Polarization is what's interacting out in the environment. So the polarization is interacting with something like mold on the surface of a bathroom. So it's on the surface. That's the polarization. Mm-hmm.
So let me ask you, what do you use in your bedroom and your kids' bedrooms?
So we have basically a combination. So we have some of our medical units that have like all the above in the bedrooms, and then we prefer to do things like the HVAC as well. So that way you have so like if you have central air and then you install there, then you have no light, no sound or anything. But if you have central air, and again, this is less relevant for you and your audience, but that's a damp, dark environment. So if that's unhealthy, then you're pumping air around from an unhealthy system. So you want to make sure that's good too. So we would want to install there. But yeah, we use units that have all of the above, basically. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Brilliant. Okay, so tell us about risks and possible issues with using air purification. Are there things that people have to be concerned about?
So in general, like air purification?
Yeah.
So there's some technologies, and we barely touch on this, but ozone is probably the biggest contender. If you do something that's unnatural in the indoor environment, that typically, from our experience, leads to unintended consequences. So if you have unnatural concentrations of ozone to have the effect that you're looking for. So there's a lot of devices on the market that have this unit, plug it in, it will cover a 3,000, let's say 1,000 square meter home, one unit. But the way it's doing that is it's putting unnatural concentrations of ozone into the environment in order to kill the bad things. But that concentration of ozone is very reactive to people, especially with those with sensitivities. So you're accomplishing one thing, but then you're also causing other kinds of problems. Sorry,
let me jump in there. Obvious. Just explain about the Air Angel was 0.02 parts per million and how important that was with regards to natural environments like the Alaskan sort of environment.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So we can talk through that. So the only unit that we have for residential applications that produces any ozone at all is the Air Angel. And that's because it's the UV bulb. So the UV technology produces very trace amounts of ozone. And we were talking about this briefly, but if you put the Air Angel inside of a closet, and you ran it for a week, the maximum amount of ozone tested in that environment is less than half what you're going to breathe in Alaska in a national park, just walking around. So, and that's like the worst case maximum, scenario. But in practicality from our studies is that when you're using it in the real world, not even in a closet, but just in the real world, even our larger units, oftentimes you're seeing 0 parts per billion, so not parts per million, but parts per billion. So undetectable ozone. We don't want to introduce ozone into the environment, but as part of the process with the UV, it's on such a low level that it's not actually contributing to ozone increase, a net increase in the environment. The other one we talked about briefly was negative ionization. So you start off trying to do a good thing, and Ionic Breeze, I think, is probably the most noteworthy company. It's probably from 10-20 years ago. They got sued like crazy in the US because they had a negative ionizer and they made all these big claims but those claims were only relevant to this little bubble around the unit.
Okay.
And it was achieving that through that static and through ozone. So
Okay.
it was saying it was producing negative oxygen, but in reality, it was creating static and ozone. And so that's where you start off with like a good intention, and it has a limited impact, but it's not actually achieving the goals. But things like HEPA, we didn't really get into HEPA, but HEPA is a third-party rating system for mechanical filters. It can have a lot of great applications. I know a lot of clients that have spent thousands of dollars on HEPA and not achieved the results because they didn't realize coming into it that HEPA has no impact on chemicals, for instance, like none. And so you have to apply the right tools to the application. Otherwise, you're spending lots of money you're not getting the benefit from. So, but as far as I guess other negative consequences, I mean, most steps people are taking for air quality can be a benefit if you do them properly. So I guess another example with HEPA is if you spend $1,000 on the HEPA unit and it's going great, but then you don't want to spend the $200 to get the replacement filter, well, that HEPA at some point is going to become a detriment to the environment because that filter is going to get clogged and maybe filling with mold, and then you're feeding the mold more organic matter. It hasn't killed the mold, so you're feeding it more. And then if you don't replace the filter because life's busy, super expensive, and so then at some point that filter is going to become a detriment. So now you're blowing it back into the environment. Same with carbon. So activated carbon is used in all kinds of applications. Again, can be very good, can be very costly. But something like radon, I don't know if you guys deal with much radon there, but in the US, you can have radon in the ground that's coming up through basements, and then it's going into the home. So you don't want that. So one of the things that people use is carbon. So carbon acts like a sponge. But once that sponge is full, it's not absorbing anymore, and it's actually starting to off gas. So you've basically concentrated the radon, and now you have concentrated radon that's off gassing. That can become a problem, right? So the improper application of technologies can start to lead to some consequences for sure.
Okay, wow, that's pretty profound. But when I look at it and just talking to you now, I mean, this is our first conversation because you guys seem like you got the technical, wrapped up. You guys have really put a lot of studies on your website. You've made sure from the technical specifications that this is healthy and safe. That the germ defender is like one of the safest, doesn't need replacements, not going to hurt you. There's no light coming off this thing. I mean, you could put two in a room. That's brilliant when you sleep. And then you could use Angel in the kitchen or in the garage if there's big issues, or you go away if you want to get sort of those odors and those chemical compounds. But it just seems like that doesn't need replacement. I mean, that's incredible. I mean, this sounds like unbelievable. What are the downsides of the germ defender?
And one more just benefit to mention. You mentioned this earlier, but EMF. So the germ defender takes just 2 watts of electricity. So extremely low electrical use or output of EMF. So extremely low there. As far as negatives, I would say the negatives is the limitations of airflow. So if it can only cover smaller areas, so 9 square meters is obviously not that big of a space. Its limitation is that airflow. So more airflow is going to increase its benefit.
But I mean, that's 9 square meters without much airflow.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's on its own. Right.
So, I mean, you could put 2 in a room. If you've got 18 squares, you're covered by 2. And it lasts, and you don't have to replace the thing.
Yeah, and any other source of airflow is going to help. So one of the things to realize with a fan, so a fan this big is going to have to work much harder than a fan this big to move the same amount of air. And whenever you have airflow, you have some amount of noise. So we always have to balance usability with airflow, because if we're just looking at us from an efficacy perspective, we want as much airflow as possible. But then you have more noise, and then you also have more size. And so a ceiling fan, for instance, if you have ceiling fans, do you have ceiling fans in South Africa?
Yeah.
So a ceiling fan is an excellent tool, and we have aspirations to make them better. So I'll just say that. But ceiling fans are an excellent tool because they can move somewhere in the realm of 4,000 CFM. That's just a giant ballpark average. That's a huge amount of airflow. A $1,000 HEPA unit probably moves 400 CFM. Wow. So your ceiling fan can move a ton, and part of that is because of the diameter of the blades and how centrally located it is. A ceiling fan plus a germ defender is going to be an incredibly effective combo. So you're getting the ventilation, the airflow, plus now the purification.
Jeez, sounds incredible. All right, tell us about sort of any other technicalities or anything we haven't spoken about. We're coming to the end of the show. You've been incredible. And obviously, like the technical info and the studies that you've got online are very, very important. But someone's in two minds, David, about, air quality. I think it's very important. I've only looked into it recently. I've been a functional medicine doctor for 24 years. I've seen thousands and thousands and thousands of patients, and I've only looked at it recently. I'm not sure why. I don't know, from a functional medicine aspect, we look at electromagnetic radiation, water, we've spent a lot of time and energy, but I think it's fundamental. But, how important is, maybe it's like 10 is the most important thing you can do and 0 is almost nothing. Just put it on a scale, or give us some more specifications or technicalities in terms of how important air quality is.
Oh, I mean, I think we talked about that initially, that on your scale, maybe it's a 3 or maybe it's a 10. It's going to be beneficial for everybody, but how high in that scale is going to matter on your situation. And I would say your experience as a doctor is very common. And part of that is it's a very new field that's really catching root on how it impacts our bodies. 10, 15 years ago, we spent the majority of our time convincing our commercial clients that air quality was a thing. Like that was what we spent all of our effort on, was just air quality is real. Here's what's in your environment. Please take this seriously. Here's how it can benefit your clients, customers, patients, whatever it is. We spent all of our time just trying to convince people that air quality was a challenge. And most people came to that conversation with, I don't think so, and I don't care. So that's what our company did for a good 10 years, I would say. And then over maybe the last 5 years, we've personally made the pivot to, we're going to spend our time on the people that know they have challenges, and we're going to provide solutions to correct those. And we're going to spend less time trying to convince these giant corporations, to take it seriously. And so that's been a shift for us as a company. But yeah, for a lot of people, it's not that you're not taking all the steps that you can, but something like air, it's a bit more intangible. You can't necessarily feel it, experience it, see it, and it's incredibly costly to measure. And so maybe I just won't deal with it. And then if you have a dramatic situation, like you've got a wildfire or something outside, your neighbor smokes a pack of cigarettes every day, or whatever that is, well, now you have a much more extreme case and you can take it more seriously. And that actually is one thing I would say is, I'm not sure exactly how the structure of the homes are there, but in the US, if you're in a multifamily building, so a building that shares walls or floors, your air quality is shared as well. So it's not just you have clean air in your environment and then your neighbor, they can do what they want. You are going to reap the consequences of what they do, for better or worse. And so we have products that can provide that mitigation, but just know that if you're in a high rise and your neighbor below you smokes, that's going to penetrate the floor. Not just the windows, it's going to penetrate the floorboards. It's going to come through the walls. It's going to come through your pipes. So as much as like the floor feels solid to us, to a chemical, it's not solid. It can penetrate that. It's porous. So we have lots of clients where they have severe health issues. Maybe they're older, maybe they have fixed income and they can't move. Their landlord doesn't care. And their neighbors, cook spices in their bathtub. They have they grill outside their window. They smoke cigarettes. They smoke marijuana. Whatever it is, we hear all these crazy stories. It's penetrating your house. The perfumes, the things. I mean, we hear people coming out of the pipes, out of floors, out of the carpet, and so it's not just you; it's what's happening around you that can affect your air quality. But yeah, we have tools for that. So some of it is sealing your house. Some of it is mitigating what comes into it. Some of it's reducing those sources. But yeah, we could talk about this stuff all the time. So just reach out, I guess, with any specific questions or scenarios that you're dealing with. I would say about every week I hear something I've never heard of before.
Wow.
I mean, there's so many variables and situations. And so, yeah, our site has a number of kind of other products that can supplement, things like bulk carbon media, just rolls of activated carbon. Yeah. We have window mounted filters. So if you have windows that slide open on the side or up and down, you can put a filter in that window to pull the air in from. So you're not just pulling in unfiltered outside air. So something like allergens, some of that could be coming from outside. You could have a tree, perfectly natural, but your body could be reacting to that natural pollen. And so you want to have a filter there in your window. And then you can create kind of a negative flow by having an exhaust fan in another window. So you want to pull the air through that filter. So there's things like that on our site. I mentioned earlier, we have clean chemicals that you can use that are non-toxic, non-VOC. We have, who knows what. But this year we'll have a lot more products. So you can check back. We're filing probably 20 patents right now on new items as well. So we're very actively trying to solve the real world challenges. And to us, we hope buildings in the future will be built with air quality in mind. But right now, most of our solutions are trying to modify existing structures to mitigate for those challenges. And in the future, we want to work with, let's design a home with air quality in mind. But right now, you gotta deal with what you got. So
brilliant. Well, David, thank you so much. Where can people reach you other than hypoair.com? Do you have social media channels, or where can they reach out?
Hypoair, it's on Instagram. I think we've got a little YouTube. We're honestly not huge on social media. For years, we've just been a science, R&D company. So, forgive us for some of the not being as up to date on everything. But hypoair.com is probably the best way. You can reach out for a one-on-one consultation with one of us. We have tons of facts, tons of articles. Just reach out to us, and we'll get in touch with you.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. From Mate to Strive, I declare favor and blessing over you. I just love your calling and your courage, and pray you would receive that, because I think you are just standing up for something that's so important, that's not been looked at, that's sort of been neglected. And I think it's going to change a lot of people's lives. I think we've got the same calling to transform as many people's lives as we can and prevent disease, prevent chronic disease. We are losing the battle against chronic disease, but I'm just seeing collective consciousness rise up, David. There are people like yourself, the podcast. We're 149 shows in a row now since the 4th of April, 2020. So, I'm excited to speak to you, and I want to get out the products here. So we'll just have a quick conversation afterwards to see how we can get these products into Africa, because I think we can change a lot of people's lives and do it affordably and do it safely and do it effectively. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time.